A very warm welcome, everyone, to the Maritime Education Podcast. My name is Barry Sadler, and today I would like to talk to you all about the Master Pilot Exchange, but talking a little bit beyond the technical bit of that. When a pilot steps on board a ship, two experts meet, and each one of those experts has a distinct role and vital knowledge which they contribute towards the safe operation of the ship. As a pilot for the last 25 years, I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of master pilot exchanges. Every time I board a ship, I meet the captain first of all, and very, very quickly have to get to know the man or woman in front of me who's in command of the vessel that I'm about to conduct into the port. Not only do I get to know the master of the ship, but I've also got to exchange critical information with the master in order to ensure that the ship is brought safely into port, the passage plan is mutually understood between the two of us, and at the end of the day, the operation of either bringing the ship in and berthing it, or unberthing the ship and taking it to sea, is conducted in the most professional, effective, and safest way possible. The Master Pilot Exchange is not just a formality. It's a structured, safety critical process that ensures mutual understanding between the ship's master and the pilot. Now, this mutual understanding includes information about the voyage plan, vessel characteristics, the operational constraints of the ship, any local conditions and potential hazards that may be present, timings of critical bits of the voyage, such as when we're going to take the tugs, and at the end of the day, a discussion regarding the exact manoeuvre that the ship will be undertaking whilst under pilotage. The Master Pilot Exchange inbound can be quite a challenge. Reason for this is that when you board a ship, you've generally got to ensure that before you start to talk to the captain at any great length, that the ship itself is in a safe position to enable you to engage with the master for a prolonged, sometimes period of time, in order to fully discuss the intended berthing manoeuvre. When you're alongside, it's not so difficult because you can board the ship's in a safe place tied up, and before you start to operate the ship, you can discuss with the master at your leisure the manoeuvre. But inward bound, a lot more challenging because first you've got to ensure that the ship is in a safe position. Sometimes I will say to the captain, "Excuse me, captain, tell me your critical things first. We just need to manoeuvre the ship safely into this channel. Once we're clear of this channel or safely in the channel, I will talk to you about the remainder of the voyage." So effectively, when I board the ship, if it is critical and I do need to start giving engine and helm commands fairly soon to ensure the safety of the vessel, I will postpone the Master Pilot Exchange, only getting that critical information from the captain that I need to make the immediate manoeuvre to bring the ship safe, leaving the rest until a much safer and quieter time to go through everything. Now, I don't just want to talk about the Master Pilot Exchange today. I want to talk about what goes on beyond the Master Pilot Exchange when the captain and the master start to interact with one another at a very high professional level. I don't even necessarily want to talk about the passage in or out of a port. I've conducted thousands of ships, and each one of those acts of pilotage has had its own individual challenges. The ships have all been different, and at the end of the day, the passage itself and the berthing of the vessel tends to be, although a critical one, a fairly everyday operation to an experienced pilot like myself. I want to go beyond the technical Master Pilot Exchange and start to talk about the deeper connection that is made between the master and the pilot once the master has gained trust and understanding of the pilot, you can have two professionals which draw on each other's knowledge to overcome critical safety hurdles. This allows the pilot to become the master's aide, almost a dependable maritime friend that the master can seek the professional opinion of. It might not be that the master wants an opinion. The master just may want to vent about something that has gone wrong on board the ship, ask the pilot's opinion about something other than the intended passage plan or the intended pilotage, and really just talk with the captain and the pilot, being mutual friends, being colleagues, and respecting each other's position to such an extent that the master feels that he can confide in the pilot. This podcast is going to be talking about some of the times when the master has done that, and when the master has asked me for advice beyond that would be given as the ship's pilot. The first example that I want to give you of how the master-pilot relationship can really develop was when I joined a relatively small ship, a 140-metre bulk carrier, in the dry dock at Southampton. This bulk carrier was fully loaded and ready to put to sea, and I boarded the ship up the gangway, ready to manoeuvre the ship out of the dry dock. Just to explain, we have a dry dock in Southampton that's a wet dock. It's no longer pumped out and ships worked on as a dry dock. The dry dock itself serves as a wet dock with scrap operations on one side and other bulk operations on the other. So I'm not talking about the ship coming out of dry dock here. I'm talking about the ship being fully laden and ready to put to sea. I got up to the bridge of this 140-metre bulk carrier to find the captain pacing up and down, looking very, very worried. I started to talk to him, ask him how his day was going. I got a bit of a grunt back from him when I asked that. And then I started to ask about the master pilot exchange, to look at the pilot card and to start to discuss with the master what the operation was going to be. Halfway through the technical part of the master pilot exchange, where I think I was explaining as to where we were going to make fast the after tug, the captain turned around to me and he said, "Can I ask you a question, Mr. Pilot?" I said, "Yes, Captain, go ahead, ask me whatever you like." He said, "Will you test some food for me?" Pilots often get fed on board ships, but they don't often get asked to test food for the captain. I said to him, I said, "Captain, that's a very strange request. You know, we're kind of in the middle here of a master pilot exchange. The tug's ready, and we really need to get going. You've paid for the tug to be in attendance. We need to get underway. Can we not talk about this as we go down the river?" And he said, "No, I'd like to discuss this prior to departure." Called up the tugs and the line handlers, told them there would be a bit of a delay, and said, "Okay, Captain, talk to me. What's your problem?" He said, "Wait here," and off he ran from the bridge. When he returned with what he claimed was a bowl of beef stew, and said to me, "Pilot, would you please taste this?" I looked down at the bowl that he was presenting with me, and the best way to describe it was boiled water with a little bit of veg and what looked like some fairly raw meat in it. I said, "Is this a particular delicacy from the Netherlands?" Because the captain was Dutch. He said, "No, this is the beef stew that we've just been served this evening, Pilot, by our chef." I said, "Okay." So I took a spoonful of the beef stew, and as the captain suspected, it wasn't particularly nice at all. There wasn't any flavour to it as such. There was certainly no seasoning in it, and the gravy of the beef stew was literally just boiled water. I told the captain I didn't think it was particularly great, at which point the captain told me the story about the chef. He had been warning the chef about his performance now for a couple of weeks. The chef was a new chef, new to the company. He'd joined the ship. He had all the relevant qualifications, but didn't seem interested in producing food that was enjoyable for the crew. The effect that this was having on the crew was stark. As the captain explained, morale on the ship was very, very low. Nobody ate anything. He had run out of crackers and biscuits days ago, because that's what everybody was turning to, because the chef was just not producing food of any decent quality. The captain then turned to me and he said, I can't sack him, because if I sack him, then the ship can't leave the berth, because the chef forms part of the safe manning. Okay, Captain, how many of you on board? I said. He said, 10 of us on board. He said, but I can't sack the ship because 10 crew members means we must have a chef to sail. I said, speak to your flag state, Captain, because if you dismiss your chef here, I bet they let you sail. And I bet the reason they'll let you sail is because you've now dropped below the number of crew that you require a chef for. And so, if you did want to dismiss your chef because he had failed to meet the standards, you'd warned him, you'd gone through all of your disciplinary procedures, I wouldn't mind betting that your flag state will allow you to sail. He asked to delay sailing for an hour, asked if I would remain on board while he took steps to address what was going on with his chef. Anyway, we delayed the ship, and the master did exactly that. He went down, he spoke to the chef, he disciplined the chef, he told the chef that he was leaving the ship, spoke to his flag state, got permission to sail without a chef, and the chef packed his stuff, walked down the gangway, and we then recommenced our unberthing operation. As we went down the river, the change in the mood of the captain was absolutely amazing. It had been obvious that the weight of this worry on his shoulders had been immense. He was probably under a lot of pressure from his crew to do something about it, and knowing or thinking that dismissing the chef would stop the vessel, he was a little bit afraid to go ahead and do it, because he was rightly aware of the effects it would have on the ship's trade. He sought my opinion. He didn't seek my opinion as a pilot. I think he was seeking my opinion as literally another human being, as somebody who enjoyed food, and was asking me whether or not the food that was being produced was any good. He wanted the professional opinion of another person. He got that. He got a little bit more than that, because I was fully aware of the requirements to carry a chef, and as predicted, his flag state did allow him to sail. He sought opinion from me about something that made a huge change to the quality of life for those on board the ship. Somebody else did the cooking on the way out, and whilst it was simple, it was finally food that they enjoyed. I obviously disembarked the ship an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours later, so I'm not so sure what happened after that, whether at the next port another chef came down, and hopefully that chef was better. But that's just one example of the master seeking another opinion from the pilot outside of that of a navigational matter, to ensure that his ship operated in a much more comfortable and content way. Another example was a smallish container ship, 210 metre container ship that I recently piloted, that was going round to Ireland, not putting to sea beyond the UK coast, but nonetheless was subject to some weather routing. The captain, on the way out, we had unberthed the ship, going down Southampton water, started tutting and shaking his head round the back. I thought he was doing that because I was doing something wrong as a pilot, but he wasn't. He was tutting because he had just received the latest email from his weather routing service. As the captain later explained, his charter party required him to, within the boundaries of safety, follow the route that was given to them by the weather routing system that was used by the charterer. Now, most of us know that masters do have ultimate discretion over the safety of the ship and can never have a decision they make on safety questioned by anybody. So the master does have the ability, if for a reason of safety, to override the charterer's instructions for the safety of the ship. But nonetheless, the captain was very, very concerned because the weather routing advice he had been given, he thought was contrary to what the weather would affect his vessel. So basically, the weather routing system was routing him towards some nasty seas and some nasty winds. So he asked my professional opinion. We got out the weather charts, we got out the routing that the weather routing system had shown him to go, and sure enough, the weather routing system was giving him advice that looked on the face of it to be incredibly dodgy. Instead of weathering what was going to be in excess of 80 knot winds in the English Channel, his weather routing system wanted him to push on to get round the Isles of Scilly and be in the Irish Sea at the time that the bad weather came through. This would have meant that pretty much the master would have been navigating on a lee shore with around 80 knots of wind blowing him ashore. I agreed with the master that the safest thing to do would be to see the heaviest winds out in the English Channel, where they had a lot more sea room to hold the ship head to wind and to ride the storm out before turning around Land's End, going up past the Scilly Isles and towards Ireland in what would have been some pretty horrendous conditions. The Irish Sea, even though in between Ireland and the UK, is notorious in heavy southwesterly winds, particularly when those winds are storm force, and that was the weather forecast. I fully agreed with the master's interpretation of events. He went back to his owner, explained it to his owner agreed, and they together overruled the charterers and weathered the storm, actually at anchor in the shelter of the Isle of Wight. So there's another example where the master got to know the pilot so well that he was able to confide in him his worries regarding something that the pilot really had no control over, certainly no jurisdiction over, and that's what happens after the pilot disembarks and the route that was taken by the ship to its next port. My final example of the captain confiding in the pilot was a ship that I did very, very recently. Again, a very modest-sized container vessel, 230 metres long, leaving the port of Southampton with a very, very frustrated master on the bridge. The master wasn't really looking for my advice. The master was looking to vent as to what had happened to him that day. And I just want to share some of the things that had concerned him with you, because they're quite interesting and they do indicate how captains can be under immense pressure when things don't exactly go according to plan. His problems all started with a slight delay in the ship's departure. Now, the delay in the ship's departure was not particularly long, was just, I think it was about 4 hours, the delay. There was a delay working cargo, so his predicted sailing time was put back about 4 hours. That happens quite frequently in ports. It's not something that we can predict sometimes. Breakdowns of cranes, things just going a little bit slower. It was a container ship, so a box not being secured properly, or twist lock being jammed. There's all sorts of things that can happen during cargo work on a container ship that can induce delays. The captain has had a 4 hour delay. Delays can be really stressful for captains because they have domino effects to other people involved in the maritime adventure. Now, although this was a modest sized container ship, but nonetheless it was required to be in Antwerp as soon as possible. The reason it was required to be in Antwerp as soon as possible was mainly because of some just-in-time delivery cargo that the captain had on board the ship. He was under a lot of pressure from his owner to get to the next port without any further delay, because the just-in-time delivery model said that the raw materials that were contained within this container ship, had they arrived late, would have an effect down the production line, leading to a delay in final goods being produced at Antwerp. It was probably further into Europe. Antwerp was merely the port at which the goods were going through. Obviously, when a ship is delayed, this increases the costs to the ship owner. The main cost that the delay causes is the increase in the use of fuel. As the time taken to get to the next port is now shorter, the ship must go faster, burn more fuel, and that has an effect on the ship owner or the charterer as for paying for more fuel. If the delay means that the just-in-time delivery has to be delivered in another method, sometimes there can be very expensive air freight alternatives which may have to be taken, where the cargo is moved onto a different delivery chain and delivered in a different method. That's not air freight to the next port, that's literally air freight to the nearest airport for the destination of delivery. Ship delays can cause shippers to miss market windows. So things like pharmaceuticals, seasonal goods, holiday merchandise, fashion, fresh produce can miss their critical sales period entirely. And this, of course, results in inventory waste, reduced profits for the receiver, and the eventual shop that passes on the goods. Contractual penalties can be involved when a ship is late, so literally the ship could be outside of its charter party if it arrives late, therefore the ship owner may be faced with a penalty for that. And of course, a ship that is late off the berth is jamming that berth up, so port congestions and log jams within the port can result from ships being delayed. So this was on his mind, the fact that they were 4 hours late. Port State Control had come on board previous evening, and whilst the Port State Control inspection had gone particularly well, there were several things that the Port State Control inspector had picked up on that he required to be done within the next 7 days. Now, these were things that needed to be done to the main engine. Now, they weren't critical because the ship wasn't detained, the ship was allowed to sail, and there was no problem in the performance of the main engine when I piloted the ship out. The problem was the chief engineer's time. Chief engineer was meant to get off in the next port of call. The master had arranged a 4-hour handover period for the chief engineers, which was absolutely fine because the joining chief engineer had been on the ship before, and then he'd booked a flight for his outgoing chief engineer to get home. But the work that needed to be done really needed the continuity of the chief engineer, the present chief engineer, staying on board, working with the joining chief engineer to get the repairs done to the main engine that were required by Port State Control. This meant that the captain had to have a very difficult discussion with his chief engineer and asked the chief engineer to move to a later flight time. This conversation did not go well. The chief engineer, basically I could hear the two of them discussing it at the back of the bridge, and the chief engineer got very, very heated when the captain informed him that he would have to delay his flight by 5 hours. He was still going home that day, but 5 hours later. This is obviously massively disappointing for the chief engineer, who had obviously looking forward to seeing his family earlier on in the day, that same day, now would probably be home when his kids were in bed, maybe even arriving home very, very late at night. Obviously very, very disappointing to him. He took it out on the master. Poor old captain had to explain why this was necessary, and eventually the chief engineer came around. The third thing about sailing late and the chief engineer's need to repair the main engines were the hours of work and rest. I really did feel for the master here when he was telling me about this, in that Port State Control had turned up and they had started to undertake the inspection of the vessel, for which the master needed to be present for most of it. I sailed the ship at 1:30 in the morning, meaning that the master had had very little rest prior to the ship departing. Now, the master didn't stay up for the entire pilotage. He did go down and rest, left me with the second officer, which is absolutely fine. But it just goes to show that even something like an easy, straightforward Port State Control inspection can eat into the captain's off time and, at the end of the day, rock his rest periods. He vented to me about that and, asked if I minded whether or not he went down for an hour and put his head down, leaving me with the second officer. I was quite happy to do so. The master obviously needed his rest. He had been up for a long time. He wanted to tell me all of this because he wanted some empathy from me. He wanted to know that his frustration with the delay and all the other little things that had happened in the last 24 hours were justified in him being a bit miffed with it all. He wasn't at the point of complaining or at the point of stopping the operation or resigning or anything like that. He just wanted another professional opinion, another maritime professional of equal standing to the master to turn around and say, "No, Captain, you're right. That's a really tough day you've had." Sometimes captains just need to hear that so that they are able to rest well, knowing that it's not just them that finds days like that particular captain had a little bit long and stressful. So I was acting not just as the pilot by conducting the ship, but perhaps being a friend of the captain by listening to him tell me how bad his day had been and allowing him to vent to me as to some of the frustrations that a modern master is faced with when he is delayed in port, with Port State Control that stops him resting, an early morning departure time, and a chief engineer that just wants to go home and see his family. So 3 examples there of where I have been on a ship, and after the master pilot exchange has been completed, that the captain has used me as a like-minded maritime professional to discuss opinions, seek advice on things beyond the pilotage, and, as that last example showed, just vent to the pilot and allow the pilot or allow the master to get things off his chest to the pilot, which at the end of the day makes him feel a lot better about being in command. I hope you found this podcast interesting. The educational value of it is that sometimes pilots are there to conduct the vessel safely in and out of port. That's why they're there, full stop. But pilots are also maritime professionals. They are also well versed in the legal aspects of being in command, as most pilots will have had command experience. And a lot of captains rely on their pilots, not just for the expert advice on a port, but for other things, such as finding somebody of equal standing and like-minded to be able to share their problems with. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. I look forward to welcoming you back to the Maritime Education Podcast in the very near future. But in the meantime, do have a great day, everyone.